I'm a police officer and I work nights. Anyone who works overnights knows how the weeks start to bleed together. You stop counting days and start measuring time by how tired you feel when the sun comes up. That week had been especially long. Short staffing, back to back calls, the kind of nights where you're already exhausted before your shift even ends. It was just after 2 in the morning when dispatch cut in and asked if there were any units close by who could respond to a distress call. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but careful, like she was choosing each word before saying it. She read off the address. I waited for her to finish, thinking there had to be more to it. There wasn't. For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. I'd been running on fumes all week, and your brain starts playing tricks on you when you're that tired. I keyed up and asked her to repeat the address. She did. It was my house. I wasn't the closest unit in the area, but I told dispatch I'd respond anyway. There was a brief pause on the line, like she was about to ask if I was sure. Then she cleared me and advised another unit was en route as well. I remember sitting there for a second, engine idling, trying to talk myself out of what I'd just heard. I live alone. No wife, no kids, no roommates. I'm the only one with a key, the only one with the code. I don't rent out rooms. I don't have family stopping by unannounced. There was no one who should have been inside my house. I told myself it had to be a mistake, a misrouted call, a glitch in the system, anything but the obvious conclusion my brain kept circling back to. Because if the call really came from my address, then someone had been inside my house while I was on shift. And that thought sat heavy in my chest as I put the car in drive and started heading home. I told dispatch I'd be the first on scene. I didn't wait for the other unit. I should have. I knew that even as I pulled onto my street. But this wasn't just another call. This was my address, my house. I needed to know what was going on, and I needed to know it now. The street was quiet. No lights on in any of the neighboring houses. No movement. Nothing out of place. My place looked exactly how I'd left it. I parked a few houses down out of habit, killed the lights, and walked up slow. I could hear my own boots on the pavement louder than they should have been. I approached the front door and tried the handle. Locked. That stopped me for a second. Not because it was unusual, but because it wasn't. I always lock my door. But standing there in uniform, responding to a call from my own house, it suddenly felt wrong. I keyed my mic and advised dispatch I was on scene. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keys. There was something deeply unsettling about having to unlock a door I was responding to, about treating my own home like a call I didn't belong at. The place I was supposed to feel safest now felt unfamiliar. I unlocked the door, took a breath, and stepped inside. I flipped on the lights, already bracing for something to be wrong. Nothing was. The furniture hadn't been moved, nothing was knocked over, there were no drawers open, no doors ajar, no signs of forced entry anywhere in the house. Every room looked exactly the way I'd left it. The place felt oddly perfect, like it had been reset, like someone had made sure there was nothing for me to find. I cleared the rest of the house anyway. Closet doors, bathroom, spare room, still nothing. As I was finishing up, headlights flashed through the front windows, another unit pulling up. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding and headed back toward the front door to meet them. The officer stepped inside, scanned the room, then looked at me. "You didn't wait for backup?" he asked, not annoyed, concerned, like maybe there was a reason I'd gone in alone. I opened my mouth to answer, then stopped. I realized he didn't know. He checked his notes again and glanced back at the door, then at me. "This your call?" he asked. I nodded. He frowned slightly and said, "Dispatch said the address was..." He read it off. My address. His expression changed when it clicked. We cleared the house again, together this time. As strange as it felt to clear a place that was already empty, we did it anyway, room by room. Closets, bathrooms, the basement, every space accounted for. There was nothing inherently wrong with the house. No damage, no signs of entry, no missing items, no explanation for the call. Just that feeling. The other officer eventually cleared the scene, and I locked the door behind us like I always did. The same routine, the same motions. I tried to convince myself that meant something. The drive back to the precinct was quiet. I kept replaying the house in my head, second-guessing everything I'd looked at, wondering if the way something sat on a shelf was how I'd left it, if a door had always opened that far, if the lights were on, the same switches. That uncomfortable feeling you get when you leave your house and suddenly can't remember if you forgot something important. Only this time, I couldn't shake it. When I got back to the station, I wanted answers. I logged into the system and pulled up the audio from the initial 911 call. I grabbed the chair and put my headphones on. The file was short, just under 30 seconds. At first, there was nothing. Just the low hum you get when a line is open and no one's speaking. Then I heard breathing. Slow, controlled, close to the phone. A woman's voice came through, barely above a whisper. "I don't have much time." There was a pause, like she was listening for something on her end. "If you're hearing this, it means he's gone." Another pause, longer this time. "Please hurry." The line went dead. That was it. No address stated, no sounds in the background that helped place her anywhere. No indication she knew she was calling emergency services at all. I sat there for a long time with the audio stopped, trying to make it fit into something that made sense. I live alone. No one should have been in my house. No one should have been calling from there. Yet somehow, the call had been routed through my house, through 911 and straight to me. By the time my shift ended, I listened to the audio 3 more times. It didn't change. It didn't explain itself. I went home after my shift. Pulling onto my street, everything looked normal, quiet. The house looked the same as it always did. Nothing that stood out. I parked, walked up and unlocked the door. I stepped inside, flipped the light switch and tossed my keys onto the counter. I unhooked my holster and set it down the way I always did, out of habit more than anything. The lights went out. I stood there for a second, then flipped the switch again. Nothing. "Not again," I muttered out loud. The house is old. This wasn't the first time the power had gone out. Usually the breaker would trip and a quick reset fixed it. I pulled my phone from my pocket, turned on the flashlight, and headed toward the basement. When I reached the door, I paused. It was already unlocked. That made my stomach tighten for a second, but I shook it off. I must not have noticed it earlier when we cleared the house, or I'd forgotten to lock it after bringing laundry up. It had been a long week, and I was exhausted. I opened the door and headed down the steps, the beam of my flashlight bouncing off the walls as I went. The breaker box was at the bottom of the stairs. I opened it. Something slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. I stared at it for a second before bending down and picking it up. It was a piece of paper. I shined the light over it and felt my chest tighten as I read the single line written across it. "I needed you to hear the call." I was standing in the basement, staring at the breaker box, trying to understand how a 911 call had been routed through my house. No forced entry, no sign anyone had been inside. Just a single sentence left where only I would find it. "I needed you to hear the call." The breaker snapped back into place with a sharp click. The lights came on immediately. I stood there at the bottom of the stairs longer than I needed to, listening, my heart still hammering in my chest. The sudden brightness brought a small, fragile sense of relief, but it didn't last. Power coming back didn't change the fact that someone had been inside my house, someone who knew how to get in, someone who'd wanted me to find that note. The silence felt wrong, not peaceful, deliberate. I took the stairs 2 at a time. Halfway up, it hit me that my gun was still upstairs, right where I'd left it after coming home from my shift. The thought tightened my chest and pushed me faster. I cleared the top of the stairs and scanned the hallway, every muscle locked, every sound amplified. Nothing. No shadows shifting where they shouldn't. I went straight to the counter and picked up my holster. I drew slowly, forcing myself to breathe as I turned in a slow circle sweeping the room. The familiar weight in my hand grounded me, but it didn't erase the feeling that I was already behind whatever this was. I cleared the house again. Bedroom, bathroom, spare room. Still nothing. But the feeling didn't change. Whatever had been inside my house hadn't left. It had just stopped being visible. That's when I stopped pretending this was something I could handle on my own. I called 911. As soon as the line connected, I identified myself and gave my badge number. I told them I needed units to respond to my address for a possible unlawful entry. I kept my voice even, clipped, and professional, the way you're trained to sound when you don't want emotion bleeding into the call. I stayed on the line until I saw headlights pull onto my street. The dispatcher kept asking if I was alone, and I kept saying yes, even though I didn't feel like I was telling the truth. This time, I didn't wait inside. Patrol units arrived first, then a supervisor, and another unit I didn't recognize. One of the officers didn't recognize me. I started to speak, to explain, and the next thing I knew, I was shoved forward, my shoulder hitting the wall hard enough to knock the breath out of me. I went down on one knee, hands grabbed my arms. Someone yelled, "Don't move!" Cold metal snapped around my wrist. For a few seconds, I was face down on my own floor, cuffed, while they tried to figure out who I was. Once they figured it out, I was able to get back on my feet, but my wrists were already sore and my shoulder ached where I'd hit the wall. They uncuffed me without apologizing, like it was something that had already happened and couldn't be taken back. The house was cleared again, more thoroughly than before. Windows checked and doors tested, basement searched, and the breaker box was examined. The note didn't get brushed off. When I showed it to them, I saw the shift happen in real time. The moment it stopped being strange and started becoming concerning. Questions followed. Did I recognize the handwriting? Did I have problems with the neighbors? Anyone I'd arrested recently who might hold a grudge? Anyone who'd ever made threats? I answered honestly, no, not that I know of. A detective arrived not long after. He didn't introduce himself right away. He just stood in my living room, looking around like he was trying to see the place through someone else's eyes. He asked me to walk him through everything, from the call coming in to finding the note in the breaker box. I did. Then he asked, "Anyone have access to the house?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Any chance you could have written this yourself and forgotten?" The question wasn't accusatory, but it wasn't casual either. I told him no. They took photos, logged the note, and documented the second response. Eventually, the supervisor pulled me aside and told me I was cleared, but they didn't want me staying there that night. "Go somewhere else. Hotel. Friend's place. Doesn't matter." He told me to keep my phone on, and that detectives would be in touch. I nodded and watched them leave. I locked the door behind me and realized something I hadn't let myself think until then. This wasn't my house anymore. It was evidence. I didn't go to a hotel. I went straight back to the station. I knew I wasn't going to sleep, not until I understood something, anything, about what was happening. I sat down at a computer and pulled up the 911 call again. I listened to it once, then again. The woman's voice stayed calm, controlled, barely above a whisper. The breathing, the pauses, the way she said, "Please hurry," like she already knew time wasn't on her side. In my head, something itched. I couldn't tell if the voice felt familiar because I listened to it too many times or because I actually knew it. On the last playback, it finally clicked. I had heard this voice before, years ago, one of my first overnight shift early in my career. Dispatch had sent me to a call, a woman in distress. I remember the tone, the cadence, the way the words landed. I stopped the audio. I didn't dig any further. I remember thinking I was finally somewhere safe, surrounded by cameras, other officers, locked doors. That was when the screen lit up. My phone vibrated on my desk, making me jump hard enough that my chair scraped across the floor. I grabbed it without looking, already assuming it was a detective or my supervisor. "Hello?" There was nothing on the other end, just breathing. Slow, controlled, close. Then the audio played again. "Please hurry." The line went quiet. A man's voice came through, low, gravelly. "Do you remember now?" There was a pause. Then the man said quietly, "It's your turn to suffer." The call disconnected. I stayed there longer than I should have, the phone still pressed to my ear even after the line had gone dead. For a few seconds, I thought maybe it hadn't disconnected at all, that if I stayed still enough, I'd hear something else, breathing, a shift, anything that proved the call hadn't ended on its own terms. Nothing came. I finally pulled the phone away and looked at the screen. Blocked number. That should have scared me more than it did. Instead, I felt strangely hollow, like fear was still trying to catch up to whatever had already settled in my chest. Around me, the station carried on. Radios chirped. Someone laughed down the hallway. A printer whined as it spit out paperwork. Normal sounds, the kind you stop noticing after a few years. I lowered the phone and rested my elbows on the desk. The man's voice replayed in my head once, then faded. What wouldn't leave was the recording. Not the words, it's the way that she spoke. I closed my eyes, trying to pin it down. Tried to tell myself I just listened to it too many times tonight, that my brain was looping something recent because it didn't know what else to do. But it wasn't that. There was something familiar there, something older. I sat still and let my mind drift back, the way it does when you're too tired to control it. Years of calls blurred together. Domestics, disturbances, welfare checks, drunk drivers slurring their way through explanations, voices stacked on top of voices until they lost all shape. Except hers. She didn't sound hysterical. She didn't sound calm either. She sounded like someone trying very hard to stay calm, like she knew that if her voice cracked, if she cried, if she begged too much, it would make things worse. Please hurry. The words pressed in on me, carrying weight they hadn't before. I opened my eyes. Why was I being targeted? That was the first place my mind went. It always is. You spend enough time in this job and you learn to assume there's a reason. A face you forgot, a name you didn't, someone you crossed without realizing it. I ran through the usual list. An arrest gone bad, a family member of someone I put away, a witness who didn't like how things turned out. None of it fit. The call hadn't been angry. The voice hadn't been threatening. It sounded like a question that had been waiting a long time to be asked. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, counting the cracks like I used to on long nights. My mind pushed back hard then, like it always does when you get too close to something you don't want to see. I thought about the good calls, the ones that end the way you hope they will. The kid I pulled out of a wrecked sedan, still breathing. The woman on the overpass who decided to step back over the railing. The man who grabbed my hand in the ER and said thank you like it mattered. I reminded myself I was good at this job, that I cared, that being tired didn't make me careless. Eventually, I stood up. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I sat down at a terminal in the corner and logged in, my fingers moving on muscle memory alone. I didn't search her name. I didn't type in an address. I didn't even pretend there was an investigation. I searched my badge number. Years of reports filled the screen, page after page of my own words staring back at me. Clean, professional, efficient, calls cleared, situations resolved, lives intersected, and then moved on. For a moment, I felt some relief, and I started noticing repetition. The same apartment number, the same block, the same phrasing, spread out over months. At first, the reports were longer, more detailed, careful. Then slowly, they weren't. The language tightened, the explanations shortened, the urgency dulled. I scrolled until my finger stopped on its own. The date was enough. I closed my eyes and let the years roll back. She hadn't started out frantic. The first time I responded, she'd been apologetic, embarrassed even. Said she thought someone was watching her. Said things in her apartment didn't feel right. Furniture shifted, items missing, a man she kept seeing outside her building. I cleared the place and found nothing, no signs of forced entry, no one lurking outside. I told her to call again if anything changed, and she did, again and again. Over the next few months, I answered more calls from that same address than I could count. Sometimes I was the first unit, sometimes I was backup. Same story every time, same fear, same lack of evidence. I kept responding, I kept checking, I kept finding nothing. Eventually, the calls started to blur together. Her voice lost its urgency in my mind, became familiar in the wrong way. Predictable, background noise, and a long list of overnight complaints. I stopped seeing a woman who was scared, and I started seeing a caller. I told myself I was being patient, that I was doing my job. What I was really doing was learning how to stop listening. The night it happened had already taken everything out of me. Earlier in the shift, I'd been one of the first one on scene to an unresponsive toddler. I remember the way his chest felt under my hands, the count in my head, the silence in the ambulance when they finally closed the doors. I didn't know if the kid was going to make it, but I stayed on duty anyway. When her call came in later, I remember sighing into the radio before I keyed up. I remember thinking I just needed a minute, that I'd get there, that it wasn't urgent. I took my time. Not enough to look suspicious, just enough to breathe, to sit in the patrol car and stare straight ahead instead of turning the wheel right away. When I finally arrived, the lights were on. The door was unlocked. She was already dead. Later, when detectives pulled surveillance from nearby buildings, the timeline filled itself in without asking my permission. The assailant entered her apartment, left, returned, and left again. The gap in the footage matched the time she was on the phone with dispatch, matched the time I was sitting in my patrol car convincing myself I already knew how the call would end. I stared at the report on the screen until the words stopped meaning anything. I failed that night. I didn't do my job the way I always did, with care and urgency. And now, someone wanted to know if I remembered that. The call played again in my ears, softer this time, like my brain was trying to sand the edges down before they cut too deep. I knew every second of it now, the pause before she spoke, the way she took a breath like she was bracing herself. I reached to stop the playback. "She called you." The voice came from behind me. I didn't jump. I didn't turn right away either. I knew who it was. I'd seen him around the station for months, longer probably. Quiet guy, older, always carrying a travel mug that had long lost its logo. He worked IT. He fixed terminals, reset passwords, recovered recordings when people swore they hadn't deleted anything. He stood a few feet back, hands relaxed at his sides. "She called you more than once." I took the headphones off slowly and turned in my chair. Up close, he looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. His eyes were steady, dry, like he'd already spent whatever tears he had in them years ago. "You shouldn't be listening to that," I said. He nodded like I'd said something reasonable. "I know. You shouldn't have been sitting in your patrol car that night either." The words landed harder than anything he could have shouted. I stood up. "Who are you?" "You've read my daughter's name more times than you remember." That was when the station noise came back into focus. Radios, phones, footsteps, life moving around us, completely unaware of what had just shifted. I swallowed. I didn't kill her. I don't know why that was the first thing that came out of my mouth, but he didn't argue. I know. That's what made it easier for everyone. I felt something cold settle behind my ribs. He stepped closer, lowering his voice, not because he was afraid of being heard, but because this wasn't for anyone else. "I moved here after the funeral. I needed answers. The department gave me some reports, timelines, apologies." He looked at the terminal behind me. "I found the rest myself." "You access restricted files," I said. "I access what was already there. The system keeps everything, even the parts you wish it wouldn't." My mouth went dry. "I saw where your unit was. I saw how long it stayed there." He held up his hand before I could speak. "You didn't ignore her. That would have been simpler. But you delayed your response." The word sat between us. Delay. "You took your time," he said quietly. "Not long enough to look wrong on paper, just long enough for her to be alone when she shouldn't have been." My heart was pounding now, hard enough that I was sure someone nearby could hear it. "You wrote that you arrived as soon as you could. The timestamps disagree." I glanced around us. No one was looking our way. No one ever did. "I have the call. The full one. The silence at the end. The part where she stopped answering." My throat tightened. "If I take this to internal affairs, they will listen very carefully." I knew what would happen. I didn't need him to spell it out. Reviews, hearings, old calls dragged back into light, patterns drawn where I'd convinced myself there were none. The toddler, the patrol car, the gap. "You're threatening me," I said. He shook his head. "No. I'm giving you a choice." He nodded toward the screen. "Go back. Stand where she was standing when she called you. Hear what she heard while she waited." I stared at him. "And then we'll see if you still think the report tells the whole story." I didn't say anything. After a moment, he stepped back. "This isn't about me." He paused. "It never was." I logged out of the terminal. My hands were steady again, which scared me more than if they'd been shaking. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I already knew the address. I parked across the street and left the engine running longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't know what to expect, but because I was trying to run through every version of what could happen next. Forced entry, someone waiting inside, some kind of setup, some kind of trap. The father watching from somewhere nearby, recording, waiting for me to do something wrong. I walk through each possibility the way you do on any call that doesn't feel right. You map it out before you step into it. You make the scene predictable in your head so it can't surprise you when it happens. The problem was, none of the scenarios I came up with explained the feeling sitting in my chest. This wasn't the kind of call you prepare for. This was the kind you already failed once. I killed the engine and stepped out into the quiet. I crossed the street slowly, eyes moving without me telling them to. Roofline, corners, parked cars, anywhere someone could sit and watch without being seen. Old habits, automatic. When I reached the front door, I stopped. It was slightly ajar. Not enough to notice from the street, just enough that the latch wasn't seated. I didn't touch it right away. I leaned slightly, looking through the gap, listening. Nothing. Just the padded, unnatural silence apartment buildings get in the middle of the night. I pushed the door open with 2 fingers and stepped in. I was ready for noise, for movement, for something to happen the second I crossed the threshold. Instead, it was horrifyingly quiet. So quiet, I swore I could hear sweat slipping down my temple and landing on the collar of my shirt. I closed the door behind me without thinking. That was my first mistake. I moved the way I always do. Slow, methodical, clearing corners, checking sight lines, letting my eyes adjust. Living room, empty. Kitchen, empty. The place looked lived in, normal. That was worse. As I stepped into the hallway, the father's words slipped back into my head. Stand where she stood. That's when I saw it. A thin strip of light leaking from beneath the bedroom door at the end of the hall. I hadn't noticed it at first. It blended into the dark like it belonged there. I approached slowly, every nerve lit up, waiting for something to happen before I reached it. I stood in front of the door and listened. Silence pressed back against me. I reached for the knob and turned it slowly, half expecting the second it clicked for something to hit me from the other side. The door opened. The walls were covered in photographs, every inch of them. Crime scene photos, close-ups, wide shots, angles from inside this very room, and mixed between them were others. Photos taken outside my house, my porch, my driveway, and my living room window, shots from the night I responded to the call that seemed to come from my address. I stepped inside without meaning to. My eyes moved from one photo to the next, trying to make sense of how they were connected. Then the sound started. Her voice, loud, too loud. The recording blasting from speakers hidden somewhere in the room. The same 30 seconds playing over and over, slightly out of sync, overlapping until the words lost their shape and became a wall of sound. I don't have much time. Please hurry. My heart slammed against my ribs. My thoughts scattered. My training vanished. I turned and stumbled back into the hallway, away from the noise, away from the room, barely aware of where my feet were going. I didn't clear anything. I didn't think. I just needed to get away from it. I hit the living room and nearly ran straight into him. He was standing there like he'd been there the entire time, calm, hands at his sides, watching me. You were parked 2 blocks away. I stared at him, chest heaving. Dispatch sent you at 2:14. Your GPS shows you stopped moving at 2:16. You didn't arrive until 2:23. She was alive at 2:18, and she was on the phone at 2:19, and she stopped answering at 2:21, and you were sitting in your car. My hands started shaking. She wasn't asking for help. She was waiting for you. Stop, I said, but it came out weak. I needed you to remember before they hear this. I grabbed him. I don't remember deciding to. My hands were on his shirt, shoving him back. He hit the wall hard enough that a frame fell and cracked on the floor. Stop talking, I said. I shoved him again. He fell. I was on him before I realized I'd moved, yelling, hitting, trying to shut him up, trying to erase the words still hanging in the air. He never fought back. Then a speaker somewhere in the apartment clicked on. A different recording. His voice. Calm. Clear. My name is Daniel Mercer. I'm calling because a police officer is here. He's unstable. He's been threatening me. If something happens to me, this is why. He failed to respond when my daughter needed him. I believe he's here because he knows I found out. Sirens wailed in the distance. Red and blue lights flashed through the windows. I looked down at him, blood on his face, not moving. And for the first time, I understood. This was the position she had been in, on the floor, alone, waiting for me. Footsteps pounded up the stairs. Someone shouted, "Police! Open the door!" I didn't move. I couldn't. A door burst open, and they found me standing over him. They pulled me off of him. Hands grabbed my arms, forced me back. Someone kicked my legs out from under me, and I hit the floor hard. My cheek pressed into the carpet, the smell of dust and old fabric filling my nose as they forced hands behind my back. I didn't fight. I didn't say anything. I just stared across the room at him lying there, blood on his face and eyes half open, breathing shallow but still there, alive. Sirens still screamed outside. Voices overlapped in that frantic way they always do when a scene is still trying to figure itself out. I heard one of them say my name. They walked me out past the flashing lights, past the cars, past the neighbors standing in their doorways pretending they weren't watching. I saw my reflection in one of the windows as they pushed me toward the car. I didn't recognize the look on my face. I've been on scenes like this before. I know what it looks like when someone realizes too late what they've done. I just never imagined I'd be the one wearing that expression. They put me in the back seat and shut the door. For the first time in years, I didn't reach for the radio. I didn't ask for updates. I didn't try to explain. I just sat there, listened to my own breathing, slow and controlled, the way hers had been on that recording. Please hurry. I understand now why she sounded the way she did. She wasn't panicking. She was waiting for me to show up, waiting for the person who was supposed to help. I thought for years what I did that night was small. A few extra minutes, a pause to breathe, a moment to sit in the quiet before stepping back into someone else's problem. I told myself it didn't change anything, that she was already gone, that I couldn't have known. But standing in that apartment, hearing her voice again, seeing the photographs, listening to her father recite the timeline like it was carved into stone, I realized something I had worked very hard not to see. She wasn't wrong. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't exaggerating. She was scared. And I treated her fear like background noise, like just another call in a long night. I don't know what's going to happen to me now. I'm under investigation, suspended, awaiting trial. Internal Affairs has the reports, the recordings, the timestamps, the footage, everything I convinced myself didn't matter. They're going to listen to that call the way I should have listened to it years ago, carefully. And for the first time since this started, I'm not trying to stop them. I'm tired of pretending that what happened that night was something I can live around. I can't. So this is my confession. Not because I was forced to, not because I was caught, but because I'm done carrying it alone.